He walked with a quiet grace. His steps were slow, careful, almost hesitant. An elderly man, maybe in his late 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes. He wore an old brown coat, a plain button-up shirt, and a pair of well-worn shoes. Nothing about him screamed wealth or status. Just a gentle soul, trying to board his flight. He paused for a moment before entering the first-class cabin, looked down at his boarding pass, and softly nodded to himself. As he stepped inside, a sharp voice cut through the low hum of cabin noise. "Excuse me, sir," the flight attendant said, her arms crossed. "This section is for premium passengers only." The man looked up, slightly startled, but still calm. "I believe this is my seat," he said, his voice soft and respectful. She didn't even check, just scanned him from head to toe. Her eyes narrowed, full of judgment. "You probably meant to head toward economy. That's at the back." He gave a small smile, almost apologetic, and gently raised the boarding pass in his hand. But the attendant didn't seem interested in looking. She was already motioning for him to turn around. Passengers nearby watched in silence, unsure whether to speak up. The old man didn't argue. He simply stood there, quiet and composed, like he'd seen this kind of treatment before. Why was she being so rude to him? He wasn't loud. He wasn't demanding. He just looked ordinary. Was that it? And who was this man really? Because the way he stayed so calm, so collected, it felt like he wasn't just another passenger. It felt like he had nothing to prove, and yet everything to reveal. His name was Harold Bennett. To anyone watching, he looked like just another tired old man trying to make it to his seat without causing trouble. He carried a weathered leather bag that had clearly seen decades of use. The zipper was scratched, and the handle was frayed, but he clutched it with care, like it held memories more valuable than money. His shoes were scuffed at the toes, and the soles were worn thin. His coat was faded, and his shirt, though neatly tucked in, was missing a button at the collar. But what stood out most was his face, lined with age but softened by kindness. His eyes, they were the kind of eyes that had seen a lot. Pain, joy, loss, and love. And yet, they still sparkled with peace. Harold quietly walked past the flight attendant, who continued to eye him with suspicion, and he sat down in his assigned first-class seat. He didn't look around. He didn't make a fuss. He simply folded his hands in his lap, and waited. Some passengers glanced at him, then quickly looked away. Maybe they wondered how someone like him ended up in first class. But no one said anything. And Harold didn't mind. He was used to it. You see, Harold had once lived a life in the spotlight, surrounded by meetings, flashing cameras, and powerful people. But in recent years, he'd chosen to live differently. Quietly. Humbly. Without titles or attention. He traveled often, but always under the radar. No special treatment. No announcements. Just Harold, an old man with a simple name, and a lifetime of stories he didn't feel the need to tell. Because Harold believed something most people forget, that respect shouldn't come from who you are, but how you are. And right now, no one on that plane had any idea who he truly was. But they were about to find out. Sandra had been with the airline for nearly 8 years. She used to love her job, the travel, the people, the sense of purpose. But lately something had changed. The long hours, the constant delays, and the missed family moments had started to wear her down. Last month, she was passed over for a promotion she'd worked hard for. It stung. Especially when it went to someone younger, someone with half her experience. Ever since, Sandra had carried a chip on her shoulder, and unfortunately, today was no different. She was assigned to first class again, expected to serve passengers with perfect smiles and warm greetings. But in her heart, the warmth was gone. She moved through the cabin like a machine, efficient, polite on the surface, but cold underneath. So when she saw Harold step into the cabin, everything about him annoyed her. His old coat, his worn-out bag, his slow steps. In her mind, he didn't belong here. Not in first class, not among the business suits and designer handbags. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice sharper than it needed to be. This section is for premium passengers only. He looked up and met her eyes with surprising calm. Yes, I believe this is my seat. She raised an eyebrow. No way, she thought. He handed her the boarding pass, but she barely glanced at it. Instead of reading the seat number, she snapped. You probably meant economy. It happens. He didn't argue, just gently nodded. No ma'am. This is the seat I was assigned. Still unconvinced, Sandra didn't bother double-checking. Instead she leaned toward her coworker, whispering just loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. Another one trying to sneak into first class. Then she rolled her eyes. A few people looked up from their phones and books. One woman frowned slightly, but said nothing. No one wanted to cause a scene. Harold slowly sat down, quietly, gracefully, and Sandra walked away, feeling smug. She didn't even notice the stares forming around her, or the growing discomfort in the cabin. But the viewers watching this now, they saw it clearly. The judgment, the unfairness, the disrespect, and it made you feel something deep. Because Harold hadn't done anything wrong. He just didn't look the way she expected. And that was her mistake. The cabin was almost full now. The usual murmur of voices, overhead compartments closing, and pre-flight announcements filled the space. But in first class, something else was bubbling beneath the surface: tension. Sandra returned down the aisle with narrowed eyes. She had checked the passenger manifest this time, expecting to catch Harold in a lie. But when she looked again, seat 1A was assigned to him. Still, she didn't let it go. She stopped beside him, arms folded, voice louder this time. Sir, I'm going to ask you again. This seat is reserved for first-class passengers. You need to return to coach before we report you. The words hit the cabin like a slap. Conversations died down. Heads turned, even the humming engine noise seemed quieter. Harold looked up at her, calm as ever, eyes full of patience. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue, he simply sat there, silent, as if trying not to make things worse. But someone else couldn't stay quiet any longer. A young woman across the aisle, maybe in her 20s, set her book down, and leaned forward. Her voice was clear and firm. He's clearly in the right seat. You might want to check your tone. Sandra shot her a glare. Ma'am, please stay out of this. We're handling it. But she wasn't handling it. She was unraveling. Her frustration was growing louder, sharper, and now everyone could feel it. Another passenger looked over. Then another. A man in a business suit whispered something to his wife. A quiet ripple of unease passed through the cabin. And Harold, he slowly exhaled, and placed his bag under the seat. Then, gently he stood up. He didn't look angry, just tired. Not from the flight, but from moments like these. He turned slightly, addressing no one in particular, his voice low but steady. Maybe, he said softly. It's time I say something. There was a pause. A quiet stillness. Something had shifted. The kind old man wasn't just enduring anymore. He was about to speak. And suddenly, everyone was listening. Harold stood there quietly, the weight of 1,000 eyes on his shoulders. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. With calm, steady hands, he reached into his old leather bag, and pulled out a slim black wallet. He opened it slowly. Inside, tucked neatly behind a clear plastic window, was a badge. Simple, elegant, official. The words were printed in bold letters. Founder and Chairman, Bennett Air. Silence. Pure, heavy silence. Time seemed to freeze. Sandra's face drained of color. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. For the first time she looked closely. Really looked at the man she had tried to humiliate. And in that moment, she realized her mistake. This wasn't just a passenger. This was Harold Bennett. The name engraved on every safety manual. The man behind the logo printed on every aircraft. The founder. The heart and soul of the very airline she worked for. Just then, as if on cue, the co-pilot stepped out of the cockpit and began walking down the aisle to check on final preparations. He noticed the small commotion, looked at Harold, then saw the badge. His eyes widened instantly. Mr. Bennet, he said, nearly tripping over his own words. Sir, we had no idea you were flying with us today. I'm so sorry. Please let me assist you. Passengers gasped. A woman nearby whispered. That's Mr. Bennet. Another voice followed. Wait. The owner of the airline. People sat up straighter. Eyes darted back and forth between Harold, the co-pilot, and the stunned flight attendant. Harold just offered the co-pilot a polite nod, and waved his hand gently. No need to fuss. I prefer to travel quietly these days. Sandra looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. She stammered. I didn't know. But Harold didn't raise his voice. He didn't scold her. He simply looked at her with the same calm expression he'd worn all along. I believe I was treated the way many others are treated when they don't look the part, he said softly. And that's exactly what I came here to see. Another wave of silence swept through the cabin. Because now, it all made sense. The old clothes. The modest bag. The quiet demeanor. Harold hadn't come here just to fly. He'd come to observe. And what he saw that day would change more than just a flight. Sandra stood frozen. Her lips parted, but no sound coming out. Her chest rose and fell, as if the air around her had thickened. She looked at Harold. No, Mr. Bennet. As though seeing him for the first time. I didn't know. She stammered. I didn't recognize you. I thought. It was just a misunderstanding. Her words were shaky, tangled in shame. The cabin remained still. No one interrupted. No one moved. Every eye was on them. Harold looked at her gently. His eyes kind. But not without sadness. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm, but carried weight. Sandra, he said, addressing her by name, though she hadn't told it to him. It's not about who I am. It never was. She blinked, confused, wiping at her eyes. He took a soft breath, then continued. It's about how we treat others. Especially when we think no one's watching. Especially when they look a little different, or carry less than we expect. His voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed. And somehow, that hurt more. Imagine if I wasn't the owner, he said quietly. If I were just an elderly man traveling alone, with no badge, no title, would it have been okay to treat me that way then? Sandra's lips trembled. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Instead, tears welled up and rolled down her cheeks. I was wrong, she whispered. I judged you. I was frustrated and tired, and I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it. Harold didn't nod. He didn't offer quick forgiveness. He let the silence linger, let the truth of her words settle in. Then, with a voice full of grace, he said, We all have hard days, Sandra. But that doesn't give us permission to forget our humanity. She cried harder now, overwhelmed by the weight of her mistake. You're not just a flight attendant, Harold added softly. You're a face people see when they're far from home. A voice they hear when they're scared or stressed. You don't just serve drinks. You represent care, comfort, kindness. Sandra's shoulders shook as she wiped her face, nodding slowly. I understand, she said through tears. I'll never forget this. I promise. Harold gently placed the badge back in his wallet, and returned to his seat without another word. The cabin stayed quiet for a long time after. Not out of awkwardness, but out of respect. Because a powerful lesson had just unfolded before them. And no one wanted to forget it. After the plane touched down, and the passengers began to disembark, the mood was very different from when they first boarded. People gave Harold respectful nods, some even whispering words of thanks. He responded with a quiet smile, always humble. But before he left the airport, Harold had one more thing to do. He asked to speak with the crew privately. Sandra stood to the side, her heart racing. She didn't know what to expect. Would she be reported? Fired? Her mind swirled with fear and regret. When they gathered in a small staff room, Harold looked around at the flight crew. Calm, composed, just as he had been on the flight. I want to thank you all for your work today, he began, his voice soft. I know this job isn't easy. Long hours, Little rest, and constant pressure. I see that. He paused, then looked at Sandra. There was a moment today that was uncomfortable, hurtful, even. But I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm not asking for punishments. Sandra's eyes widened. Harold continued. What I am asking for is reflection and retraining. We can all improve. We can all be reminded of what truly matters, treating people with dignity, no matter how they look or where they're seated. Sandra felt tears in her eyes again. She didn't expect his mercy. His kindness hit harder than any scolding could have. He offered a small bow of thanks, and left quietly, without asking for special treatment or attention. Weeks passed. One day, Harold received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, with neat but nervous penmanship. It was from Sandra. She poured her heart onto the page. She told him how that day had changed her, how she had gone home, ashamed but also deeply moved. She spoke about how she'd started treating passengers with more care, how she'd apologized to others she'd brushed off before, and how she now saw her job, not just as a role, but as a responsibility. She thanked Harold for showing her grace, when he could have shown anger, for choosing to teach instead of punish, for giving her a second chance. When Harold finished reading, he smiled, a warm knowing smile, because in his heart, he'd always believed people could grow. Sometimes, all they needed was a quiet reminder, and someone to believe in them. There's something deeply powerful about quiet dignity. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The kind that doesn't demand respect, but earns it, through grace, patience, and quiet strength. That's who Harold Bennett was. Not just a man with a title or a badge, but a man who chose humility, even when he could have chosen power. A man who, when faced with judgment and disrespect, didn't respond with pride, but with a lesson. And that lesson, it's one we all need to carry in our hearts. Because you never truly know who someone is, or what they've been through. Maybe the elderly man who moves a little slower once flew fighter planes. Maybe the woman in the worn-out sweater is a single mother working 2 jobs just to survive. Maybe the tired father on the red-eye flight hasn't seen his children in weeks. Everyone has a story. Everyone carries something you can't see. As Harold once said, it's not about who someone is, it's about how we treat them. Weeks after that flight, Harold found himself sitting at the airport once again. Not as a CEO or a founder, not even as a passenger. Just a man watching planes take off, watching his legacy soar into the sky. But it wasn't the aircraft or the company name he was most proud of. It was that letter from Sandra. It was knowing that a simple moment handled with kindness could change a heart, could inspire someone to do better. That's the legacy he truly cared about. Because in the end, the titles fade. The badges get tucked away, but kindness, that stays. It lingers long after the flight ends. So, the next time you meet someone who looks different, dresses simply, or doesn't seem to fit the part, remember Harold. Remember that respect costs nothing, but it can mean everything. And remember, even the smallest moment of compassion can lift someone higher than the clouds. Thank you for joining us for this story. If it touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of the power of kindness. Because in a world full of noise, sometimes, the quietest voices carry the most important truths. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness always wins. Every interaction matters, and your support helps us keep telling stories that inspire. Thank you so much for watching.